now that I have swallowed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out on such a beautiful and bright sunny day. It really is beautiful. This is a wonderland we live in. But it looks like not everybody wanted to be out in it today. Today we have a kind of a serious topic of human trafficking in the area. And we have two presenters, Sister Marlis Jack and Sister Valerie Killian from the Order of St. Francis, who have been working hard on this project and will give us a lot of information on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, we have been working on this project for 7 and going on 8 years now, and so we have a little practice, but it's a practice that doesn't seem to be going away. Only because the issue is one that keeps increasing, and we know more about it now, and we know more of how we might be able to assist with it. So we have a PowerPoint that we put together for this morning just to tell you what some of the issues are and to hopefully enlighten you in new ways and how you might be aware that you might not know at this point in time. Anyway.
Good morning. We'd like to start with a prayer this morning. Oh God, we didn't see them, but you did. The hundreds and thousands of human beings trafficked each year to join the millions who are trapped in modern-day slavery. Under terrible conditions, they work in factories, plow fields, harvest crops, work quarries, fill brothels, clean homes, and haul water. Many are children with tiny fingers, good for weaving rugs, and small shoulders for bearing rifles. Their labor is forced, their bodies beaten, their faces hidden from those who don't really want to see them. But you see them all, God of the poor. You hear their cry. You answer by opening our eyes, breaking our hearts, and loosening our tongues to insist, no mas, no more. Amen. We'll start with the overview of the presentation today. We want to acknowledge our belief in the respect and dignity of all persons. We want to raise awareness of human trafficking in our world and in our local communities. We want to present current legislation to combat human trafficking and offer you some resources to facilitate your response. And we thank you for being here.
So the question is, where does it happen? In 2016, the national office had already received over 13,000 calls, 33,000 of which were human trafficking cases. And sex trafficking cases in October of 2016, there were 12 arrests in Minneapolis. But these people come from all over. Hundreds of women, particularly from Thailand, are brought to the U.S. and are trafficked. And pretty close? Oh, there we go. Okay. And women are usually forced to have sex with strangers up to 12 hours a day in some cases. And I lived in Cambodia, and this was a huge issue there.
You think it doesn't happen here? Think again. An example, Stewartville, Winona, Rochester, Dover. It happens all over. There are no exemptions, be they cities, small towns, or even rural areas.
One of the things I can tell you is that during the Super Bowl, Mayo Clinic and lots of other, the Women's Foundation of Minnesota really were working on human trafficking. And 4 days before the Super Bowl happened, they had already arrested 67 people in St. Paul. So it's right, not far away.
We're going to give you a little test now, and you can just visualize which answer you think is correct, and then we'll let you know. What is the largest criminal industry in the world? Drug trafficking, But human trafficking doesn't have all the data in that drug trafficking does, because many times it's hidden. And so therefore not all the data can be accomplished, but what they're finding out is that it is increasing rapidly, and the younger ages of the persons who are put into this grow rapidly.
So what is the number in the world? Anyone want to guess? It's not a small number.
What are the current estimates of global profits for human trafficking in US dollars? 150 billion, and growing rapidly. This is global, but it tells you something about what we're facing.
And what is the age, generally, of a young woman? 12 to 14, yes. And the little picture that's up there is a bullet, along the highway? Billboard. Couldn't think of it. Bulletin board didn't quite work. That was the board that we had up here in Rochester.
What is the number of children trafficked each year for commercial sexual exploitation in the United States? 100,000. Now think for a minute of a country coming into our country and kidnapping 100,000 children. If you've got that picture, what would our country do? But that's exactly what's happening.
In one case, we had one young woman here in Rochester and one from Byron who were trafficked, and the trafficker was one who, they moved them very quickly. So he was suspicious that the police were after him, so around midnight he takes his two young women and goes to a hotel in Eden Prairie, and by the next morning they were in Fargo, and the next day they were in Ohio. So it works real quick.
What percentage of traffickers are prosecuted? Oh, that's yours.
That's all right, it's only 1%.
No.
Because they're difficult to prosecute.
The definition of human sexual exploitation, human trafficking, an illegal and criminal act. Recruitment, transportation, transferring, harboring, or receiving of humans. By threat, by coercion, by abduction, by fraud, by deceit, by deception, or abuse of power. But interestingly enough, you can put it in words of much simpler. When one person obtains or holds another person in compelled service for financial gain.
And they're entrapped by force. Any of the things up there, beatings or confinement, fraud, they're always promised a better life. And this was very true in Cambodia. They were promised that they would be sending money back to their families when I was there. And coercion, the very things that Valerie was talking about, violence, psychological abuse, it's controlled by the traffickers, and molesting of a minor by parents and friends. So it's familial in some cases.
Common methods of recruitment. Relationship with someone involved in prostitution, family member, boyfriend. Many times the pimps or the dealers are putting themselves on as your boyfriend and buying you things. And then what happens? Pretty soon you're tricked. Homelessness, runaways, another area. Drug abuse, especially if they are on drugs already in some way. They need money to keep supplying that habit. And these dealers are out to provide. Solicitation by an adult, lured through promises of work or benefits. Start working as dancers. Places where youth congregate, schools, mall, library, social media. Unsupervised use of the internet by children in their homes is such an easy prey for any dealer or recruiter.
And most of these things happen online. 3 out of 4 are trafficked online.
This slide will tell you the different forms of human trafficking, though we are dealing mostly with the sexual exploitation. Commercial sex, labor trafficking, enslaved housekeeper or janitor, sweatshops, agricultural business, restaurant, nail salons, forced begging door to door, street sales, child soldiers, child adoption when something happens in a country, and pretty soon there are many people very poor. They're being promised, like Marla said, we will provide education for your child. They never get educated except what the trafficker wants. Organ trade, now, that's one of the new ones. You don't need 2 kidneys, do you? We can give you so much for 1 kidney. Mail-ordered rides from the past, and maybe going on now. And international dating. I know somebody in France, and they're willing to date me. Easy prey.
Another way is, when I was in Cambodia, one of the ways in which this was happening is a farmer in need of money, and he has a gripe against his neighbor, and he sold his daughter to the neighbor for, I don't know the money exchange, but anyway, and so the daughter ends up in Seattle, Washington, in about 5 days. So, not able to speak English, not able to do anything for herself. It may be happening in your own neighborhood, and the thing is to be alert to it. One experience that I can talk about is when I was in Beloit, Wisconsin, driving through not so long ago. I was at a restaurant, and there was somebody else who had come in at the same time as I did. And it was an older man with a younger woman. She looked like she could be about 16, I don't really know. Anyway, the clue, we were watching this from our booth just because it was just so interesting. The gentleman ordered a drink for himself and the young woman, and the waitress asked for her ID, and she had nothing. She had no purse, she had no ID, nothing. And the waitress said, well, I can't bring you one, which was right on. But when the waitress went to give the order to the kitchen, he went around the other way and ordered a drink and brought it to the table. The waitress noticed that there were 2 drinks on the table when she came back, and she said, I still need to see your ID. And she couldn't produce it, so she just left it there and left them their hamburgers or whatever they ordered. And the manager came, and the manager said, I need to see your ID. And of course there was none. And so he took it away. When they all left, we asked the manager if we had done the right thing. Should we have reported this to police? And he said, I did all that I could do. There was nothing wrong with what was happening here, and so I could only take away their drink. I couldn't call the police and say, this might be a human trafficking incident. It certainly looked like it, because he was about 65, she could be about 16. Now it could be grandfather, granddaughter. You don't know. So you have to kind of let some things go.
We're going to see a video now about a true story. The girl's name is Brianna. She is 18 years old, and she is a cheerleader and an honor student, but she was tricked into human trafficking. Uh-oh. Maybe we won't see Brianna. Unless I can tell it.
Yeah, we can
That's the
tell the
best I
story.
can do. Yeah, we'll just drop that one.
We see it often enough.
Brianna was a waitress in a restaurant. Very nice looking girl. Very nice looking girl. One time 3 gentlemen came in. One very handsome. And she kind of looked at him and he looked at her and he began flirting a little bit with her. And then he told her later on, "Where are you going to school?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to be going to a college in Seattle." And he said, would you like to come earlier to Seattle? I can provide transportation. I'm from Seattle. We can see everything that I have to show you. Well, she wasn't too sure of that. But after a few times of him dropping in, and he was so handsome after all, she decided that maybe she could have a little trip, and she told her parents, "I'll be going to Seattle to check out where I can live." And the parents understood that. "And I have a friend who's willing to take me." So the friend pulled up, took her to Seattle. When they got to Seattle, he bought her, he said, "You know, you're such a beautiful girl. I'd like to buy you something." And bought her a new set of clothes, took good care of her, made sure she had what she wanted, and said, "We'll find a nice place you can," and he did take her to look at some places so that she could possibly later on find a place. Well, what happened was, he finally said to her, "You know, it would be really good. I want to show you this place that I have where friends come, some of my friends that I know, and you can meet them too." She was a little worried, but thinking, "Oh well, you know, I trust him. I came all the way out here with him and everything. I trust him." And so when she got into that place, it was a dance place. You know, lap dancing, pole dancing, you name it. And she sat through it, and when she got out, she said, "You know, I really don't like any of that." And he said, "But look at, you know that clothes I bought you? That was expensive. You like expensive things, don't you?" "Well, a young girl, sure." So then he said, I tell you what, you just do it for an hour or so and you can make much more than what you made in that restaurant. So pretty soon he had her convinced, and she tried the dancing. She didn't like it, but it sure brought in the money. So she kept thinking, "I have to pay rent here. This will help. This will help me when I go to college." Okay? Pretty soon it was not lap dancing. It was, "I have a few friends. If you'd like to meet them, they're really nice too. And then, but I'd expect you to be really kind and good to them." You know where that would lead. And pretty soon, she was a victim of trafficking. The only thing that saved her, she had to go back home because she only had a week to do this visiting. And when they went back home, her boyfriend, her former boyfriend, met her, and he could see such a change in her. And he took her, he said, "Come with me," and he took her to his home where there was somebody who could help. And that person talked her out of it, helped her family understand what had happened to her, and to say this happens all over. The police were involved in it. The boyfriend disappeared.
These are the real phases of sex trafficking. These are, if you look, it's all 2 women, each in a row, and these are the pictures that show kind of what happened over the months for them, and these are all people from this Rochester area.
Notice the woman at the end looking totally abused. If they do not perform well, or they do not bring in the money that is needed, they are put out, and they are hit, and they are beaten, so that you won't do that again. It's interesting, I want to just make a comment then too. When I was driving home one time with groceries, I was at the Hy-Vee parking lot coming out, and here we a lot of times see a person standing there, And you see them, collecting, asking for money. Here was a young girl, maybe about 15 or 16, standing there, a beautiful girl. And oh, she was really begging from all the cars as we stopped. And later on, I remembered something I had learned. Do not approach the person or ask them anything at that point, because the pimp is in a car in the parking lot, and you will be subject to probably very much, he will come out of the car. I found out later on that someone did help the girl, they slipped her, which was very smart, they slipped her the number to call for help, and she did get help. And we found out that she was only sent out there because she didn't bring in enough the night before. So these are cases all over that are happening right before our eyes. If you see any red flags, they always tell you report it. There's a national number, which we have on the back table. There are also local numbers. You call our police here. Because it's very important that it stops when you're in doubt that something is going on. That's a red flag. These are the sex trafficking risk factors. You start with poverty, I think you probably all know. Youth, usually it's youth, and sometimes families have even sold children into pornography. So it happens very young. Race. Many of our people who are brought here are probably from other countries or Native American. Minnesota is great for a Native American cases. History of abuse. If they were abused as a child, most likely they will abuse as an adult. History of prostitution in the family, which was talked about before. Lack of resources. If they don't have what they need and they don't have the support from their homes, this is what happens. They're so easy to go into somebody who says, I care about you much more than your family does. Chemical dependency, we talked about too. If you're already chemically dependent, you need money. Lack of support systems. When they are brought in from another country, their passports are taken by the dealer. Their identification is taken. They have no resource except to go through their recruiter. Lack of immigration status, that's an example of it. You come into a country as a young person, maybe you are not with your family, you don't know the language, Sister already talked about that, and you can see the result.
There's always a link with pornography sometimes, although not all the time. But it is one of the ways into sex trafficking, and it is the gateway, as they say here. And what we do know medically now is that pornography from a young age does change the brain patterns of young people. So that's something you want to be aware of.
And the worst part is, in pornography, many children in 3rd or 4th grade have seen it. They have seen it on TV or on their internet. So what does that set them up for? Who are the sellers? Females, males, adults, even children. It can happen in a school. One child belonging to somebody who is getting money if he recruits or she recruits other children. Okay? It can happen especially on malls, libraries, things like that.
This picture also shows some of the faces that have been arrested here in Rochester. And you can see there are a variety of races and whites as well.
If you're interested in seeing, and not seeing, but reading some of the reports, at Assisi Heights we have 3 scrapbooks full of newspaper reports from all cases handling here or in surrounding towns. And this is just our part of Minnesota. Who are the buyers? Though the majority of buyers are men, women are also purchasers of commercial sex. They are various ages and races, and maybe persons who are single or with families of their own. And the interesting thing is, The buyers, or the Johns as we call them sometimes, the buyers are what keeps the demand going. If the buyers stop, the demand stops.
One of the things that we did this, maybe it was 2 years ago now, we have usually do an event once a year in early January, and we did have an event set up, and we had actors on stage and people were talking. Right below the stage we had, with the Rochester police, had set up a sting operation, and so they were at the front of the room, and they had put an ad on Backpage that morning at 7 a.m. Our program started at 8. And every time a buyer called in to that phone number, it would ring a bell for us. So we heard this dinging, 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 dinging. It was just wonderful. And people in the audience were just shocking every time it would ring. So by 9:30, we had 32 calls. Now, what the police did tell us is that that is a low day. Because the Johns or the people are home with their families on Saturday morning, and so it's a little more difficult to do it. But noontime and at 5 o'clock is the big time in the Rochester area because people get off work at that time, and so it's an easy way to make a connection.
By the way, one of the officers poses as a 14-year-old. And he said, I have it pretty much down pat. I know what kids talk about at that time and what they do. So he really lures them in too. And then a policewoman is in the motel room when they get there. As soon as money is transferred, the police are usually in the bathroom, they said, coming out and they said that one day, because of what happened up at Assisi Heights with those people calling in, they couldn't put the Johns fast enough, take them to the police station, so they just brought them all in the bathroom, one after another as they came. So be careful.
There's another thing that the Rochester police have begun, and that they've passed it around to all of Minnesota now, and that is they are able, I don't exactly know how they can do it, but a lot of these people call on cell phones, and they did find the name and address of the person who was calling in, so they collected them, and they were able to send out letters from the police department to the individual saying, and the opening letter came and it said, "We are watching you." And then, now, can you imagine having a wife seeing a letter come from the Rochester Police Department addressed to your house, and you're wondering what it is? I think that would be a shock in itself. But I think they sent out 92 at that time. So that was an interesting little statistic.
Another one is workplace. Sometimes they will also get a letter to a workplace, will get it, and it will say, someone in your room in your business is using this number. And then it's up to the workplace to look into it.
So why does demand thrive? Obviously, it's because of high profits, and there's a low risk. And of course, the Rochester Police Department can't give all their energy also to this effort because they have all kinds of other things that they have to be attentive to as well. So.
The safe harbor law in Minnesota, there have been laws, federal, international laws. There have been laws that have been put out in areas, different areas. Rochester is noted, not Rochester, Minnesota is noted that in 2011 the safe harbor law came out. And the safe harbor law says that these people who are trafficked, especially under 18, are victims and therefore should not be treated as criminals. And the interesting thing about it is, you know, at one of our events, the main prosecutor, Mark Ostrom was there, and he was so surprised by this that he immediately brought it up. And pretty soon Minnesota was recognizing all of them as victims, thanks to Mark.
In Minnesota, we have a program called No Wrong Door. It was established in 2014, and that Minnesota has named a navigator in all of those different areas that you can see there. Ours is a light green one, and Laura Sutherland is the navigator for Southeast Minnesota, and she's very proactive and very good at her job. But most of the services are available in the Twin Cities, although St. Cloud is an area in which they now are opening a home or a house, so to speak, for trafficked young women. Mission 21 was hoping to do that here in Rochester, but they have decided to go a different route instead of providing a home, just because of the expense of keeping up a home. And so they are doing it with
Foster families.
Foster families are taking in some of the young women. And the last time I heard that they were working with 14 women in this area.
And what's hard is many times these victims are drug addicted, chemically dependent, because that's how the dealer has kept them. And you know, when that happens and you bring them into a home, all those issues have to be dealt with too. So it's not an easy task, but Mission 21 has been great. And also Mission 21 provides, if somebody comes to them, you know, with the problem saying, I think I'm being trafficked, this is what's happening to me, if they got away from their dealer for a while, what might happen is they will provide them with whatever they need at the time, and they will right away put them in contact with up in the cities. I can't remember the name of the place. Safe. I want to say Safe Haven. Yeah, it's a place that does take women in.
They provide the supportive services that they need, and they are well trained.
Safe Harbor. What can you do? Educate yourself, read, watch videos, have programs like this. Promote human dignity and gender equality. And that starts young with your children. Encourage legislation to combat human trafficking.
And Amy Klobuchar was one of the people who really worked on getting that safe harbor thing through.
Invite speakers to address here we are. Learn about services for trafficked persons in your area, and there are many. There is victim services. There also are other areas. We put on the table in the back numbers you can call if you need help or if you suspect something. They always tell us, and the police have told us, don't try it yourself, you know, but you can. We will come and we will talk to the person.
This is another thing you could do, and that is, of course, is be aware of what's happening on the internet with your children, and the kind of things that they use cell phones for, texting, etc.
Sexting on the cell phone,
texting,
too.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Pray, and don't do the demand. That when the demand stops, so will texting, so will sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, always we want to teach our children and grandchildren about the human dignity and how to respect others and what is safe.
This is the national number. There are little cards called Look Beneath the Surface. The number is in there. There's, in case that you're just here in Rochester, you call the police department and ask for the crimes unit, street crimes unit. And they will look into the problem if you suspect something is going on.
Let's just open it up for questions now. If there's anyone who would like to ask anything, I don't know if we can answer it, but I'd certainly give it an attempt.
We'll repeat your question.
Thank you, since we don't have an extra time. Do you speak in schools here?
Laura Sutherland, who is the navigator, does. We have attempted to do it from our perspective, and it's very hard to get within the school system because, I mean, I think they have so many demands of who wants to come and talk to them, and so we've kind of batted zero on that. We have done it with religious schools. that
parochial
have it.
schools and high schools.
Yeah, we've done that, but,
I have another question. Okay, well, you're right.
In communities where prostitution is legal and controlled, do you see any change to the trafficking numbers?
I don't know that I have a real fast answer to that. Yes, in some states it is legal and not in Minnesota. And what I do know is that they still exist there because there are people who are on the sidelines, but it's probably less. In Minnesota, one of the places where we have the highest trafficking is in northern Minnesota with Native Americans, Native American tribes. It's one way to get off the reservation. And then also we have the highways of 35 and 90 going through, so it's a good crossroad, and so that they can move them quickly. But in other states where it's legal, it's a little different numbers.
Also, they're younger sometimes, the younger ones, because in states where they're legal, there might be an age thing. And here, we can start at 12 earlier. There have been 11-year-olds, as you saw in our local area.
I understand this problem, and I don't have an answer. But it seems to me like some of the solutions are problems themselves. Like you get a letter from the Welsh Police Department saying, we're watching you. That sounds like bullying to me. And it seems to me like some of the things they set up are entrapment, that they fall
Stings.
into the purvey of creating the problem. Now, if you got a letter saying we're watching you, does that make you stop, or does it just make a person go deeper and fight it more? I don't see that helps anything.
Maybe both. I mean, it could make it worse, but I think it could also make it better.
How does it make it better? If a person's doing that, is that going to stop them?
Well, just because they're younger, they're not 18 yet, they don't have rights to, after you're 18, it's different.
I think it depends on if that
But-
person has a sense of shame. If they don't, they'll go deeper. If they are worried about being caught, they'll probably stop.
Well, what if they get wrong information? Then it's really, I think that's horrid to give to somebody if their information is wrong. Who's checking them to see that they got the right information?
I would think the person could complain if they thought it was wrong, but I would doubt if they would. Because
I know they
shame,
would complain.
yeah, because shame has a high factor. And sometimes when a person who is new to it, has not done it yet, but thought maybe they'd try it, to get in touch with someone, what happens there, I think, is that the idea is that maybe I should rethink this, because this is probably not something good, because I've been notified that they are aware of what was happening in that home or out of that
Let's
home.
imagine you're not doing it, and you get this letter saying we're watching you.
Then I think you're going to want to complain about the letter.
You think so?
I do.
You think your kid's gonna
I
complain
do.
about the letter, or are they gonna hide? They're gonna feel so ashamed.
It's not always children.
I'm-
Most of the time, it's the adult who is the buyer. Most of the time.
Who's the letter going?
The letter is going
To the home and to that person.
To the
To
John.
that John.
To the John. It's not going to the young woman.
I think it's important to reiterate how they get those names.
Yes, they get them by tracing through the telephone number. So then that would tell you someone at your home using this number
Is buying.
is buying. And we are aware of it. So we will be watching that. It's the best we can do with it right now. But a first-time buyer, that could scare them. That could really scare them. And we know that it's the demand that keeps it going. If there was no demand, there would be no victims.
It's a demand we want to control.
What?
Any other
questions?
questions? I understand what you're saying though, sir. I know. It can be very hard.
We create a problem by, the solution is creating a problem.
Well, I think the solution is stop the demand. And if you have to do it that way, do it.
Anything is okay.
If you can save a child's life.
If you can save a child's life, correct, from the
Well, let's
back.
give our teachers guns, we're gonna save lives.
We know that doesn't work.
That's right. And I think some of this doesn't work either.
I suppose what we're trying to do now is just look at the problem and work with it the best we know. If we come up with something that's better in the future, it will be used. If we come up with people who don't demand it, it won't need to happen at all. Any more questions or observations? We have on the back table for you, we have one that's called For the Parents. It's put out by the library. It's a wonderful page on some of the statistics and all of the books. You know, the library has books on this too that can be helpful to adults or to young people. The second one on the table is called Snapshot of Human Trafficking. And it takes all the effects of human trafficking in different areas. So you have a chance to see what it is. Organ trade was not on that one. And we're sorry it's not. I usually write it in pencil on top for somebody. But the idea is that is one of the latest. Yes.
Well, thanks for your presentation. A few years ago, and I heard you make a presentation earlier, I learned some things. I was surprised that Minnesota was pretty high on the list of trafficking, and they mentioned something that's important, and that's the I-35 corridor, and then as well as 90. And that goes all the way straight from the Mexican border to Duluth. And it's fairly easy to bring women and others up that route and bring them to the port of Duluth, put them on ships and things where it's hard to actually, as they make plans, to find them and to get at them. And, so there's just a lot of things going on. Some of the things we've tried to do, say, in some settings, part of this could be used for domestic abuse, but could be used here as like little business-sized cards and have on them in different languages, English, Spanish, Asian languages, Arabic, and numbers to call that are safe. And these cards are so small, you could obviously put them in your shoe if you had to hide from someone, but they're put into little holders on the back of women's bathroom doors. And so when women go in there and there's no man with them in there, they can take these and kind of hide that card, and if they have a chance, there's opportunity they can call numbers and try to get some help. So people are trying to think of creative ways to help, when it's difficult to reach.
I know in Indianapolis, one of the things they did for the Super Bowl that year was to put this number on the soap that was in all of the hotels. Anyway, so people are always looking for unique ways to connect, as you're talking about.
And one thing that we've done too in the past is different hotels and that have been notified, and the employees are trained, just as they were for the Super Bowl. The volunteers were trained, this is what you look for. And they also had cards that were given out so that you do it very surreptitiously. You just kind of slide it to the girl, maybe, who's sitting next to this gentleman who seems to be controlling her.
There have been a few stories too lately of like flight attendants. I mean, it's just being on alert. I mean, I kind of look, I go to hotels now and just see if something looks really wrong, but flight attendants have been observing, somebody young coming in with somebody much older, doesn't look right, just kind of like the story you had in that restaurant. But it's almost like maybe see something, say something. There are times that actually law enforcement has been called and people have been, taken out and kind of saved from in an earlier stage by that observation.
Any other observations or questions? Yes.
What's the process after someone would call, like Ruth said, if you see something, you call the police, what then would happen? And they would come and you try to do it so that the person didn't know you called and that kind of thing, so they wouldn't be tipped off. But then how can they handle that? I mean, what's the process then?
I'm afraid the police would have to tell you that. I don't have the answers to that, but I do know that many times they will just question the person if they see a young girl or a couple of young girls with an elderly or even a younger person who seems to have control over those girls. They will actually stop them and they will ask questions.
Ask for papers, ask for
And if-
Like a
Ideas.
task force or somebody doesn't have it.
Right, and if they don't have it, you know, or somebody, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my papers, you know, the next question is why?
And then generally what's happened is they call in a navigator right away. They have a list of people that come and assist the young woman and take her out of the situation, take her home with them, or take them to another location. And then they get all the human services kind of that they need. Now, they all need something different. So in some cases, it might be detox. You know, so the navigator assesses what the first need is, and then they keep track of them for the next months and visit with them, and etc. So they get them the services that they need.
We are at time, I know, and so we don't want to keep you any longer. If you have questions or that, or you need some more information, there are things on the back on what you can do too. Okay? Please be free to help yourself.